All right, we are live for this class on sexual healing as a form of womb healing work and so much more. And before we dive into it and as we arrive, I'd love to just invite all of us into practicing the pause, just allowing ourselves to slowly arrive into this space and also just pause a little from the unfolding of your day-to-day assignments and as you step into the space. So just allowing a moment for you all to arrive, and as you get into the space, do say hello to me. And if you'd like, also let me know from where in the world you're joining in. And just a sound check for those who are here. Could you kindly let me know if I'm audible? Are you able to hear me? Because I didn't want to have my headphones on. So is our sound good? Please let me know. Okay. And so welcome to this live class on sexual healing is a womb healing work and more. So that's what we're going to be exploring here today. And for those who might be joining me for the first time or see me for the first time, I know that we have a lot of new faces here. And if you're joining me for the first time, my name is Tumelo Mareri, and I am a Botswana-based spiritual healer, womb medicine woman, and an embodied leadership guide. And Masha, thank you so much. I'm glad I'm audible. Awesome. And so in today's class, our intention is to introduce this mini series that we're going to be doing on sexual alchemy work. So I imagine that we're going to have quite a number of classes or sessions just for us to deeply unpack this theme, right? And what we're also going to be covering today is just looking at how and why sexual healing is a womb healing work, and this more that I speak about. And we also want to look at what we mean by sexual healing and also what it is that might necessitate this sexual healing work, right? And so, I also just want to put it out there that this is a work for everyone, right? It is not only for women, it's for men, it's for all non-binary people, right? And so as we're going to be journeying through this series, please know that this is an invitation to all of you, to all of us, to deeply explore and to deeply interrogate this aspect of our being. Hey Justice. What? That is so great that you'll be in bots. So I know most times when people come to Botswana, they come to Gaborone, and that is not where I am right now. So otherwise it would be great to link up. So those are the intentions of our class today. And I thought we could also just start with a content warning, all right, that this teaching will contain a mention of sexual trauma and trauma just generally, right? And so I invite you to please ensure that you are deeply resourced as you step into this conversation, right? And if some triggers might come up during the journey of this conversation, you may pause and take up or continue this conversation later, right? So this is just with the appreciation that just the word trauma or just the phrase sexual trauma can be quite triggering. So may we please resource ourselves as we step into this conversation, right? And another thing that I would like to put out there as we begin is just the acknowledgement that this subject of sex, of sexuality, of how we experience our bodies is a taboo subject, right? And it is a conversation that can therefore be difficult to have for most people, right? And so we just want to acknowledge and name the difficulty of it, or the potential difficulty of it, or that it can be an uncomfortable conversation to step into, and sometimes also an unsettling conversation to explore, an unsettling aspect of our being to explore, all right? And so I would actually also invite you to just, if you can, just to connect with yourself and see if there might be any permission slips that you could give yourselves, right? Permission slips to do, to feel, to be however way you might need to be during this conversation, right? And that is one way of resourcing ourselves, right? And so by it being a taboo subject, or just us wanting to acknowledge that, we're also wanting to bring awareness to there being a difference between something that is private and something that is taboo in our society, right? And with that also comes the appreciation, the knowing that things that are often taboo in our society can breed a lot of shame. And this is actually part of the healing work, like by just us having conversation on this matter, right? Beginning to bring light to it, beginning to unveil it. We begin to diffuse and to dissolve some of that shame, right? And just it being taboo, and there oftentimes being a lot of shame that we may hold around this aspect of our being, that alone is actually an invitation to healing, right? Because that shame can constrict our experience of our sexual energy and the manifestation of that sexual energy, all right? And by sexual energy, we are referring to it as a creational energy, right? Yeah. I seem to be frozen now, and I don't know what that might be about. So I'll pause a moment. Okay. Yeah, well, on my end, it seems as though I am frozen. Which is not cool. Let's just pause and see if the technologies... Oh, okay, great. All right, so let's continue then. Yes, so as I mentioned, we're wanting to bring a distinction between something that is taboo and something that is a private experience or a private unfolding of our lives, right? With the appreciation that that which is taboo in our society and in our lives can breed a lot of shame. And that shame, the shame that we experience quite a lot around sex, sexuality, and the experience of our bodies on this earth, is actually one of the things that necessitates this healing work of sexual healing, all right? And by sexual healing, we are not talking about a healing of the physical act itself, which can often be a misconception, all right? And so by sexual healing, we are speaking to how we experience our sexual energy and how it manifests in our individual and in our individual lives and in the broader world, right? Yeah. Okay. Ooh. It feels like there's a bit of a tech hiccup on my end. Do you all still see and hear me just fine? Oh wow. Okay. All right. I'm glad I'm good. So I'm just gonna continue, even though on my end it looks a bit off. All right. So when we speak of sexual healing, right, it is not of the physical act itself, but of how we as individuals experience our sexual energy in our individual lives and in the broader world, right? And so then this brings us to the question or the provocation of what is sexual healing and what is it for, right? And so within the context of this work, right, the intention is to arrive to a healthier and a more elevated way of enjoying and of tapping into and of expressing our sexual energy, right? The intention is for us to experience our sexuality with freedom, with confidence, and in sovereignty, right? And by sovereignty, we're meaning without any external or any inorganic interference or influence, right? We are wanting to be able to tap into our own inner organic infrastructure of our sexuality, right? And be able to experience and to make manifest our sexuality and the expression of our sexuality from that place, right? And so with the sexual healing work, we are wanting to experience the sexual energy in its most organic frequency, right? In its most organic template and its most organic infrastructure within which it was created and within which we were meant to experience it and to manifest it, right? And so we then also want to look at what it is that might necessitate the sexual healing, right? So we're saying that the intention is for us to arrive at a healthier and more elevated ways of enjoying and tapping into and expressing our sexual energy, right? And so then we also want to look at what is it that might stand in the way of us experiencing our sexuality in these ways, all right? What is it that might necessitate this sexual healing, right? And with this, we're also going to be exploring why we would say that sexual healing is a womb healing work, right? And so much more, because it's so much more than the womb healing work, right? And so on the first layer, right? On the first layer, this sexual healing is for the limited and the limiting conditioning that we might receive as we grow up as human beings in this world around sex, sexuality, and our bodies, right? And that might result in us feeling some sense of shame, some sense of fear, and some sense of guilt regarding this specific aspect of our being, right? And so this conditioning might be in the form of teachings that we receive as we're growing up, right? Teaching relating to the broader spectrum of this phenomenon, right? It might also be in the form of us observing the adults in our lives and how they navigate and how they experience their own sexuality and their own bodies, right? And so if the ways in which they experience their sexuality and their bodies might also be flowing from these limited and these limiting, or this limited and this limiting conditioning, right? It means that however way it manifests and however way we will actually witness it might be one that results in us internalizing that limited and that limiting conditioning around our sexuality and our bodies, right? And so this conditioning might also be in the form of beliefs, of stories about what sex means. It might be in the form of beliefs, of stories around what it means to be a sexual being, around how we're supposed to express our sexual energy, about what is the right way, right, of expressing this sexual energy, right? And it might also be in the form of beliefs and stories about what it means to move on this earth in the body of a woman, in the body of a man, in the body of a non-binary individual, right? And we also find these teachings or this conditioning in our religions, right? And this is not all of them, but we find that some teachings might lead us to repressing or to wanting to repress our sexual energy, to repress our sexual energy and not allowing it to flow as it should through our being, right? Some of these teachings might also cause us to internalize the ideas, beliefs, stories that our sexual energy is something that is to be hidden, or our sexuality is something that is to be hidden, is something that is to be ashamed of, is something that is not to be spoken about, and again, something that is to be like repressed and suppressed, right? And so what we find is that because here's the thing, like this sexual energy, by virtue of it being an energy, it means that it moves, it's alive, right? And so when it doesn't find that movement, a healthy movement through our entire being, right, it may lead to unhealthy manifestations of the sexual energy, right? And we see this quite a lot in our world, right? So when we are not taught about what this thing is, when we are not taught about how to lean into and how to tap into our sexual energy, right? That lack of understanding, and oftentimes the suppression and the repression can lead to unhealthy manifestations of the sexual energy. And one of the ways in which we see it manifesting in unhealthy ways, right, is through sexual violence, right, in its across the wide spectrum of how sexual violence and sexual trauma might occur, right? So we have read and heard a lot of stories of some of what has happened in some religious institutions, even spiritual institutions, right? Where there might be a lack of education, a lack of understanding of how we are to relate, how we are to navigate the fact of us being sexual beings, right? Which can lead to, these unhealthy manifestations of the sexual energy, right? And so when we just consider this bit, right, of this being a healing for the limited and the limiting conditioning that we might encounter in our upbringing as human beings, we also begin to grow an understanding. So when we are thinking of beliefs and stories, right, this is an impact of the conditioning that happens at a psychological level, right? It's also a conditioning that has an impact on our bodies, right? Because it has the result of rewiring how we experience our bodies and how we move through the world in our bodies. It has a way of shifting the organic intelligence of our bodies, right? And so the sexual healing work is therefore also a psychological healing work, right? For the beliefs, for the stories that we might hold around sex, sexuality, and our bodies, right? It's also a body healing work, right? Because when we receive this conditioning, some of it can actually be received as a trauma, right? A trauma that is then held within our bodies that impacts on the organic makeup of our bodies, right? And so when we're doing a sexual healing work, we're also doing the work of returning our bodies to their original and their organic infrastructure and architecture, right? So that we may begin to be able to access the organic intelligence of our bodies in the experience and in the manifestation of our sexual energy, right? And at an energetic level, this conditioning also impacts our womb spaces for us as women. So again, like for us as women or womb-bearing beings, we do have these physical wombs, right? And I just want to highlight that everyone, whether we have physical wombs or we don't, has a creational center, right? Luckily for us womb-bearing ones, we have like a physical organ which we know houses our creational center. So this is to the men in the space as well, that even though you might not have a physical womb, you do have a creational center, your sacral chakra, which is affected by this limited and limiting conditioning that we receive as we are growing up in the society, right? And so we're wanting to do the healing work so that we may dissolve whatever limited or limiting conditioning, we may dissolve, we may rewire whatever limiting beliefs, right, we might have internalized, whatever limiting stories we might have internalized about what it means to be a sexual being, which actually affects and informs how we experience the physical act itself, right? Yeah. So just a brief pause, and I want to check in with you all whether you can still hear me all right, because the tech issues are weird on my end. Can you all still hear me okay? Please let me know. Okay, beautiful. Thank you for that. And secondly, so first we mentioned that it's a healing for the limiting wounded conditioning that we might receive, right? Second, it is a healing, like what might necessitate the sexual healing work is the distorted programming around sexuality and what it means to be a man or a woman or a non-binary being in this world, right? And so when we speak of distorted programming, like we could think about it, like an example we could use is like a computer. You know how computers have programs like that software. For example, the Microsoft Word program, right? It has its own inner coding that enables it to function in the specific way that it does, right? And so we could also think about our inner organic coding of how we are to experience our sexuality and how we are to manifest our sexuality in this way, right? Like there is an inner coding within our own inner infrastructure and our inner template of our sexuality. This is how we're created, right? We hold templates for different aspects of our beings, right? And so we also hold a template in an inner infrastructure architecture for our sexuality. And it has its own specific coding that contains information, kind of like DNA, information of how we are to organically experience our sexuality and make manifest the sexuality in the world, right? And so what we find is that given all that is going on in the world, there are quite a number of things that we might encounter that might alter the organic, and by organic I mean as originally created by Source God or Source Creator, all right? Or that might alter the organic coding of the template of our sexuality, all right? And so we find this happening a lot with what we might consume from the media and from entertainment, right? So a lot of us might have actually, although we might have not received any education around intimacy, around sexuality, we sure watched a lot of movies, we watched a lot of music videos that from which we learned how to do intimacy and how to make manifest our sexuality, right? And so a lot of this distorted programming, a lot of this altering of our organic coding of our sexuality, it happens through what we might see in the media and through the entertainment industry, right? In the forms of movies, right? In the forms of music videos, right? And when you look at what the current generation of I'm a 2000 are consuming, it's quite a lot, right? And also through pornography, right? And what some of these things do, and what we're also being invited into here, is to come to an appreciation of the potency of the frequency held within these mediums, right? And their capacity to rewire the organic architecture of our template of sexuality, right? So yeah, a reflection invitation for you would be for you to just think about where you learned how to do intimacy, where you learned how to do sexuality, where you learned how to express your sexuality as a man, as a woman, as a non-binary being, right? What is it that has informed how you currently do what you do, how you currently behave, how you currently interact with that aspect of you being. Right? And because this is something we experience a lot in intimate relationships, I'd also invite you to just reflect on what it is that informs how you relate with these energies or with this aspect of your being within the realm of intimate relationships. All right? Where did you learn what you currently do? Where did you learn how you currently express and experience your sexual energy or your sexuality as a human being, right? And on one of the classes that we're going to do in this series, we're just going to look at how to heal the sexual wound, right? Because actually what we're talking about here is the sexual wound. Like this distorted programming around sex, sexuality, and pleasure, this wounded conditioning around our bodies, around our sexuality. This is what constitutes the sexual wound, which I believe everyone holds this wound or carries this wound to varying degrees, right? Given our experiences or the unique experiences we have had in our lives, yeah? Awesome. Just a brief pause to take that in. And also please feel free to share any questions you might have or anything that might resonate, anything that might be coming up for you as you're listening to this, yeah? Awesome. And a third layer of what it is that might necessitate the sexual healing, right, is sexual transgressions that we might experience on the body, on our bodies, across the very wide spectrum of how these might occur or how we might encounter them, right? And so within this very wide spectrum, we have on the far extreme the sexualization or the over-sexualization of our bodies by ourselves and by the rest of society, right? So this is without even touching our bodies. There is this general experience of there being a sexualization of our bodies and of our body parts, right? That actually registers on the body. Like if our bodies were to speak, if our bodies were to show us what the experiences have been, that sexualization of our bodies is a sexual transgression, all right? And then moving towards the middle, we have sexual transgressions in the form of sexual harassment, right? And on the very far extreme, we have sexual transgressions in the form of sexual violence, right? And so because these sexual transgressions impact us, or the fact that our bodies are usually on the receiving end, they're often like the direct recipient, like they receive the direct impact of these transgressions. This means that when we're doing the sexual healing work, we're also doing a body healing work of healing the body of the impact of these sexual transgressions, right? And when we're doing this healing work also, we're also wanting to heal the imprint of this trauma on our bodies, right? And as we heal the imprint of this trauma, we're also wanting to remember the organic intelligence of our bodies, right? Which can often be blocked or quietened or silenced by the imprint of the trauma and by the residue of the trauma, right? So our bodies actually hold a wisdom, our bodies hold an intelligence, right? Which a lot of us have unfortunately been disconnected from, right? Such that as we do more of this healing, we come more and more into our own inner knowing. We come more and more into the wisdom of our own bodies around what our sexuality is, around how to organically experience and manifest organically our sexual energy, right? And the sexual healing work is also a work of healing the womb, right? Because most experiences of sexual violence, of sexual trauma, directly impact the womb space, right? And so this work also invites us to heal the imprint and the residue of this trauma on our bodies and on our wombs, right? And the sexual trauma can be personal, and it can be one that is from this lifetime, right? And it can also be a sexual trauma that is from another lifetime, right? With the understanding that our souls are vast and have multiple experiences, right, in the universe. And the sexual trauma can also be generational or ancestral, right? It could be that when you're coming in for the work of healing your womb, right, as a result of having felt some level of womb pain, that womb pain might be as a result of trauma that is held within the lineage, right? It could be that some grandmother, some grandfather, somewhere along the generations might have experienced or might have perpetrated some degree of sexual violence, right? And by virtue of you experiencing some of that pain, that actually holds an invitation for you to heal this trauma, for you to heal this pain for the lineage, right? And so with that understanding, we begin to see that sexual healing can also be an ancestral or a generational healing, right? For the trauma that is held within the lineage, and that you're possibly being invited to dissolve and to heal for your lineage. Yeah? And so when it is an ancestral or a generational healing for your lineage, right? This is just looking at like members of your blood family, right? And what we're also being called to come into an understanding of, right, is that some of the sexual trauma might be at a collective ancestral level, right? For example, it might be as a result of trauma that was experienced by our African ancestors during the timelines of war, of slavery, and of colonialism, right? So we might be sitting here as women and as men in the circle, right, talking about healing and also leaning into our healing work, right? And we'll find that actually what we're being invited to heal might be the imprint of trauma that is experienced by our collective African ancestors during those timelines of war, of slavery and colonialism, with the appreciation that we've seen this in movies a lot, right? Like sexual violence is one of the weapons used in wars, right? And so even with wars that are raging now across the continent, across the world, right, we are being invited into healing violence, right? We're also being invited to understanding of what it is that might cause the result and perpetration of sexual violence, right? And he's being invited to an understanding of sexual violence or the perpetration of sexual violence in with that, really, we wanted to come to an understanding of what this sexual healing is, right? Because oftentimes when we think of sexual healing, our minds immediately jump to the sexual act, right? Or that sexual healing is an opportunity for us to be taught how to do the sexual act. There is space for that, but for me, within the context of what I offer, the sexual healing work is for us to heal our inner conditioning that might constrict us, that might limit us in the expression and in the manifestation of our sexual energy, right? It is a healing for the distorted programming, right? That might make it a constricted experience, right? For us in our intimate relationships, in our individual lives, right? It is also a healing work for the violence, for the trauma that we might experience around our sex, sexuality, and our bodies, right? And yeah. And yeah, so also with that, my intention was to also just lay the ground for this mini series that we're going to be doing on sexual alchemy, right? And so I do anticipate that we're going to be doing a number of classes, of videos around this, right? And just deeply unpacking even further this theme of sexual healing, right? And sexual alchemy. Awesome. So that feels complete from my end, yeah? Although I feel like these tech hiccups might have interfered with our conversation today. And yeah, lastly, and in closing, I know that this can be a lot to take in, right? Just the conversation of sexuality itself, right? As I mentioned at the beginning, it can be one that might be uncomfortable to sit in, unsettling. Just the mention of trauma and sexual trauma might be triggering, right? And so I do invite you to deeply resource yourself in the ways that you might need most, right? Yeah. And lastly, if you'd like to go deeper with this work and heal, I invite you to either book a once-off healing session with me. This is one of the themes that we cover in my once-off sessions. Or you can also apply to work privately with me through my private healing program. And links to both these healing offers are in my bio link, and I will also add them in the notes of this class. And until the next class, bye.